Hey everyone, it's Julie Muhn, Senior Research Analyst with Finovate. We're here today catching up with Nancy Giordano, Strategic Futurist, and one of our keynote speakers from FinovateWest last week. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
It was fun. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah. So in your keynote, which I guess, first of all, to our audience, if you haven't gone ahead and watched Nancy's keynote, you can find it in the on-demand content section of the Eventfinity platform. So be sure to catch it. It's definitely worth watching. So Nancy, in your keynote, you mentioned 4 awakenings shaping our future. Can you give us the highlights of those 4?
Yeah, we'll just run down them. I mean, again, these were all things that were becoming more and more visible before the pandemic. It was just that the pandemic really put them into clear awareness, like clear focus. And now we're recognizing that they create the springboard for sort of rocketing ahead. So these things that we thought were just of the moment, again, had been trending prior, became more visible, and now are going to accelerate and reshape society. So quickly, it's the increasing digital reliance on technology for work, well-being, medicine, schooling, everything, our whole way of living. And the fact that we're only 1% into what will become a completely different digital future. I call it the first productivity revolution, as opposed to we're leaving the industrial era, we're moving into the productivity area. The second is a much more I think respectful understanding of our relationship on the planet and its relationship with us, like our, sort of our imprint on the planet as we think about sustainability and climate stability and ways in which we can navigate this with more harmony between economic vitality and our environmental stability. That's really what we're trying to sort through as we start to see again how we impacted things during the pandemic. And then the third is around becoming much more sensitive to, much more respectful of systemic racism and overall injustice. And biases in various ways. So again, it's not just of the moment and not just the protest marches that happened, but it's really about recognizing that these are over hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, and that we need to address them in much more thoughtful ways as we move forward. And then the last was an awareness about our own resilience and our ability to navigate change and so much disruption, but recognizing that we're sitting inside of systems. So it's not just our own ability to manage our own resilience and our mental well-being, but thinking about how systems are holding us well in terms of our families, our neighborhoods, the brands that we do business with, the companies that we work for, our governments, et cetera. And we're becoming just, I think, much more aware of all that. So those are the big 4.
Yeah, interesting. I'd like to touch on that first one. You discussed we're entering into the productivity revolution, different from the industrial revolution. And obviously, it doesn't measure value by industrial output, is what you were saying. So in this new productivity revolution, how is value defined and what are the new priorities?
Well, if you think about it again, like I guess I just get frustrated that we keep using this industrial terminology, which then assumes that we continue to have an industrial mindset around that. So if you think about the Industrial Revolution and you go through the first, second, and third waves of it, there were extraordinary advances that we all made. And you could argue that it lifted us out of poverty and it created a growing middle class, et cetera. But then it also created a lot of breakdowns. So we only measured part of what was valuable, right? Which was literally industrial output and consumption. We didn't think about planetary health. We didn't think about inequality. We didn't think about things like even ecological health, forget even just like climate change, but the fact that we just have trash all over the planet now that we haven't thought about in terms of externalities, and then just growing physical, emotional, and et cetera, deteriorating health around that. So what we need to figure out as we move into the productivity revolution, where we're able to ramp up so much more productivity with less resources, to be quite honest, how do we measure that differently? So regeneration becomes more important, sustainability becomes more important, well-being becomes more important. We see countries thinking about shifting to a well-being budget. We see GDP losing its relevance as the one metric that we should be measuring everything against. And many people are trying to create alternatives to that. So it's just more holistic. It's using only, it's branching out from just one metric around, again, manufacturing and consumption, and thinking about it in a much more holistic, healthier way. GDP is just a really interesting example. It's like this metric that measures, opioid manufacturing, cigarette purchases, cleanup after a fire. The more people that are incarcerated, the better. The more the health insurance costs and childcare costs go up, the better, because those all drive GDP to rise. And we think about those are all actually things that don't hold us very well as individuals or as a society. So if we can think about measures that are actually more inclusive of the kinds of things that take good care of us, the better we will be.
Yeah, I like that. Very cool. So, so you have a new book coming out. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. What's the title?
Leadering. It's about how visionary leaders play bigger.
Okay, so in your talk, you discussed the difference between leadership and leadering. Can you give us the highlights of the
Yeah,
difference?
so this goes back to, again, if you root everything back to this idea that we were in this industrial era, now moving into this productivity era, we can't drag necessarily an old mindset into a whole new exponential way of doing things. Like it's not going to hold up, partly because it creates even bigger breakdowns than we've had. So beyond the environmental and the ecological and all the things we just discussed, this idea that we will be able to use such exploitive technologies, like we will just have to think about this not just through an ROI lens, but through a how do we want to live as a society lens. And we have to make decisions faster. So, really, leadership was a construct that was designed very effectively to be able to continuously grow. It was closed and static and hierarchical, intentionally to root out variability so that we would be able to consistently grow and deliver short term profitability. Like it was perfectly designed for that. But as you move again into this new era that's moving faster, we need something that's more dynamic and inclusive and caring and adaptive that allows us to be able to foster constant innovation and experimentation. We want variability. We want to be able to learn, right? We want to be able to evolve and then change it from just idea of the short-term profitability to long-term sustainable value. We're just flipping long R&D cycles with short-term gains to actually much faster learning cycles, much longer value creation.
And it sounds like taking into account some of the social implications as well.
Yeah, it's part of it. And so again, it's a mindset shift. So if you think about the first one was really about we had this map about how we're going to replicate success and continue to scale it, right? That was really the mantra of the last century of business. And really what we're thinking about now is how do we grow it in a way that is more thoughtful and more holistic and more systemic and thinks about the implications and externalities and all the stakeholders that are involved. So it's partly more humanistic because it puts humans hopefully at the center. If we put humans at the center, we design better solutions, but it's also just more holistic and it looks at all the implications of the work that we do. And it allows us, again, to learn from one another faster and hopefully build solutions that we think about it over a course of time as opposed to just in the moment so that we are actually building things that are safer. Right? We're
Yeah.
going to have tremendous power when you think about the productivity that these technologies will allow for. We can grow food hundreds of times faster. We can do medicine from miles apart in robotics. We can 3D print houses in fractions of time. I mean, the amount of stuff that we're going to be able to do explode is phenomenal. And yet you need to be able to use those technologies also in very responsible ways.
Mhm. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the pandemic at the beginning of our discussion, and it is in fact difficult these days to have any discussion without filtering certain things through the COVID lens. And COVID, in the banking sector, obviously has helped. Well, it's been it's helped accelerate the move to digital, but on the other hand, it's also been very tragic economically speaking, and also from a health standpoint as well. What is your view on the balance there? Is COVID helping or hurting the move into the future?
And I mean, I think that we would never have wished this on anything. Like this is a very, very, to your point, tragic, and the implications are real. But I think it's more the don't let a good crisis go to waste mentality, right? I think it was Winston Churchill and then Rahm Emanuel who used that. But it's a really great way of thinking. Okay, if this has shaken us awake, what are we now seeing, and what are we now doing with it? And so I think that one of the benefits is that we did all en masse have to move into this digital future together. Many people, including myself, have been advocating for those behaviors for a long time, and were told it was too expensive and too difficult, too disruptive, too this. And all of a sudden, dang, we had to. And what you saw is the companies that were more prepared, or the industries that were more prepared, have fared much better than the ones who didn't. And not just from a technological perspective, but also really thought about their purpose, really thought about corporate culture. These are the things that keep an organization thriving when they're in a more distributed form. So if we start to imagine that this is where we're going to move into the future, those are actually practices that are extraordinarily helpful to start developing even more, to double down on. So I think it's just made things like this more visible. There's a term I heard this morning about tech acceleration, I think. So it just accelerated e-commerce, e-banking, remote learning, e-medicine, et cetera, into the future, whether it's 5 years or 10 years into the future. And we all had that capacity. Like we could have all done it, and we just chose not to. So now that we all did it together, and the upside of doing it all together is that we got to learn from one another, and we got to share vulnerabilities around it, right? Because it wasn't like you were the only person who couldn't figure out how to, unmute yourself on a Zoom call. Like it's just become the thing that we all coach each other on now. So I think that there's been something that has been very helpful. I think the acceleration is not just the reliance on it, but also the shared learning that has been possible during this time that I think has been extraordinary.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, the shared social experience. And, with consumers as well, from a consumer standpoint, have also had to adapt to digital. So it's been difficult on them as well as businesses and banks and the
But I
like.
think that, the upside too then is that we're seeing people now as more humans. So not just as customers or not just as employees or not just as, voters. Like we're actually really thinking of each other as humans and thinking about the relationships that we have and thinking about the multi-layered things that go into our decision making and into our lives. We have a lot more empathy for. So that part, interestingly, as we become more digital, has become more visible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So a few silver linings there for sure. Great. So obviously, this is a lot to take in, this in your keynote presentation. And in your keynote, you discussed what we can do to help us succeed. Talk to us about what characteristics differentiate successful people and what's one quality that we can all and should all cultivate.
Well, there's this conversation around this idea of adaptability quotient, an AQ, and it came from Amin Tufani, who's a colleague at Singularity University. But it's really about these practices that we can develop in order to become more adaptable, if that's the word, that we aren't so afraid of change. We have to become more confident with constant change. So how do we do that? So again, for me, it's a big mindset shift. I'm thinking that you have a map that's got all the answers or a playbook that's going to have it all sorted out for you, and all you have to do is follow, the protocols, to this idea that you're shifting to something that's constantly in flux. And so we think about, instead of using a map, you're using a compass and a North Star. So developing that capacity to be able to navigate in real time, sense and respond to change and opportunity and threat and, new partners and possibilities is really what we need to do. So I group it all under this thing about, adaptability quotient. And a leadering mindset, but there are a set of practices that we can develop from, really thinking about curiosity and investing in curiosity and incentivizing curiosity in our organizations, to having very strong partnerships and ecosystems and even uncommon partnerships, sometimes with our competitors or people completely outside of our industry. We have a lot that we can actually partner with and do interesting things with. It's thinking again about the responsibility that we hold about having this data and having this technology and having this potency that we will have moving forward. And lastly, I will say it's also compassion for ourselves and for our customers and for each other. We're all learning this stuff in real time. None of it's all going to be perfect. We have to get rid of that idea that there's a way to optimize everything, right? We're going to land of minimal viable products and constant learning. And so being kinder to ourselves as we go through that and realize it is a process. It is not, again, a rule. It's going to be in constant evolving and emergent, and getting more and more comfortable with that is helpful.
Yeah, yeah, I like that idea of compassion, especially in relation to banks and consumers, which I feel like the industry has really been good at taking on in 2020.
Yeah, and I think in designing and empathy, there are a lot of really interesting products and services that have been designed in the industry that really come at it from a much more empathetic place. So my favorite, is the Kasasa take back loan idea. The fact
Yeah,
that you can pay into your loan and get that money back if you need it really understands the moment in time that we're in, that people have income variability, that there's a lot of stuff that can change and happen quickly. And people are very afraid of being able to see too far into the future and hold themselves accountable. So it just gives them that kind of really thoughtful flexibility that allows them to advance their financial well-being. At the same time, it keeps them safe. So if we can design more in that way, I think that we will see a tremendous amount of, I don't know if it's loyalty is a little tricky to get, but certainly appreciation from customers and from all stakeholders that recognize that you actually really do care about my well-being.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, and in the end, as you said, yeah, an increased financial well-being, which is the point, and instead of taking advantage of the end consumer.
Yeah, I mean, again, because we can win. I mean, we can actually help you and empower you to do all those things and still thrive as a business, right? We do these things that don't need to be at cross purposes, the same way that environmental stability doesn't need to be at cross purposes with profitability. Like there are ways that we can actually, if we take those and we build with that in mind, how can we ensure people's well-being financially, physically, environmentally, ecologically, emotionally? There are all kinds of solutions that we can come up with that are extraordinary and that we can benefit from, so that everyone benefits from. So that's really the thing. The way we really advocate for it is really simple. Just put humans at the center and then design from there. Like it just doesn't seem that challenging to sort out, because when you do that, then you make really, really good ethical decisions. We make fair decisions, right? We make empowering decisions. We make innovative decisions because we're like, oh, well, actually, that's a problem that'd be phenomenal to solve for, or a threat that we can help blunt. So I just think, if we can just shift our mindset away from thinking that we need to win to thinking that we can care for people, we will make actually really great decisions and we will all thrive.
Very cool. I like that. Well, on that note, a huge thanks to you, Nancy, and thanks so much to everyone for tuning in. This has been Nancy Giordano, Strategic Futurist. And Nancy, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It's been really great to be part of this community. I'm a big believer in banks and community banking and the value that they bring to society. So thank you all for everything that everyone does.